Good afternoon. I normally say ladybugs and yellow jackets, but I last week was I put out a poll for new ones to say for author reads. So since it's Friday and you guys are here with me on author reads, it's now good afternoon, bookworms and biblioflies. That is what we decided on as being cutest. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me here on Fave Productions for Author Reads this Friday. I'm your host, Fairy Princess Lolly. And before I jump into all of the things today, I, of course, want to do our quintessential um, shout outs. So first, I like and subscribe, and I actually, because I said bookworms, I know it says ring the bell, but I'm kind of like thinking like scrunch the bell, like a worm, scrunch it. Because of this year, I decided I was going to use a new adjective every single time I do a show for something to do to the bell. So scrunch the bell today, and also a shout out to today's show sponsor, which is Pixie's. Whew, I'm sorry. My sinuses, Pixie's potions. My sinuses are getting the best of me this afternoon. So please bear with me on that if you guys will. Pixie's Potions is a single mom-run Tacoma-based business that specializes in healthy, feel-good care products. So they offer uh, pain relief, everyday personal care, featuring high quality responsibly sourced ingredients from Better Shea Butter, Majestic Pure Essential Oils, and Nature's Best CBD. And they specialize in small batch handcrafted, so everything you get is sure to be recent and fresh and not sat on the shelf for a very, very long time. They have body, face, and beard care products. This is good for Valentine's Day, you guys, because it's coming up and now is the time to buy. Check out their full line at www.pixiespotions.com. And if you live in the Tacoma area, if you're within a 20-mile radius of Tacoma and you make a $20 or greater purchase, use the code LOCALDELIVER and you can have a free delivery. So to yourself. So please check them out. Their information is there in a ticker. It is, of course, in the low bar wherever you're watching from, so you can find it after the show at any time. And with that said, I will welcome today's author to the show, who is Jay Palmer. Jay, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Yes, well, so if you will, tell us a little bit about who you are and maybe where you're from. Give a shout out to anybody you feel it's important to shout out, and tell us about what you write.
Well, my name's Jay Palmer. I live in the Seattle area, Bothell specifically,
Hmm.
and I've been writing pretty much most of my life. I've been around the science fiction scene for quite a long time. I was part of the Puget Sound Star Trekkers, and I lived at the NISFIS in Kirkland for a while. And
You are a half an hour away from me, more or less, give or take some. So we're neighbors.
And I'm a knight in the Society for Creative Anachronism, in which I've been very active for many years. So,
All right. Well, shout out to the Kingdom of Ontier then, right?
yes.
All right. Well,
Unfortunately, there's no events happening right now, so everything's kind of falling to the wayside.
that is true. We definitely we had to cancel Fairy Blossom last year. This year, though, we are planning to do something. Even if it is not our typical outdoor event, we will be having some manner of event because, well, I don't think anybody can handle going 2 whole years without events. So, if you will, tell us a little bit about what you write and some of your books because you have so many published books. It's
Well,
incredible.
I write a wide variety. I write whatever kind of comes to my mind, and I don't try to stick with one genre because I don't read one genre. You know, you could come in and I'm reading Stephen King, or I'm reading Orson Scott Card, or I'm reading William Shakespeare, and I have most of Charles Dickens memorized if I've read it so many times. It's just a matter of, you know, I think of, I try to think of something and then look at it in a new light. And that's sort of how I approach things. Um, my biggest seller, the Vikings trilogy, I asked myself, if somebody really, really wanted to go to Valhalla, how would they do that? Well, the answer is that they would carefully plan their deaths, because you didn't have to be a good person, you didn't have to be a bad person, you just had to die with a sword in your hand ready to fight in battle. So, this would take a little preparation to ensure that it happened. With Viking Daughter, I'd always known that Viking women had legal rights that most women of the Dark Ages couldn't even imagine having. And finally, I asked myself, how did they get them? And so I wrote a book about how they got them. And
this is a trilogy, though.
That's actually 2 trilogies. First, they go through all, yes. First, they go through all the realms of Norse mythology. And in the second trilogy, they go through all the realms of the Egyptian mythology.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's a lot of realms. The Egyptians had a lot of
Yes,
mythology.
they did. In fact, you have to decide which expert you want to go with, because so many people argue so much on who's right and who's wrong. They still do not have a definitive, even with the Norse, this is the way it was. There's still arguments. When you're writing about, legends, you have to look at all the different perspectives. And of course, every expert has a different opinion on something.
Right, of course. I suppose they all did their doctoral theses on some minutia that added to the field, and they're going to stick with them for the rest of their career.
Yes, and in fact, I actually managed, in researching Egyptian mythology, I actually managed to get a hold of the curator of the Museum of Egyptology in Cairo. And my question for him was about the duat, the tunnel that goes underneath that the sun travels at night, because they thought the sun went through a tunnel. And there was a great demon, Apep, at the end of it. And I said, it's full of demons. What kind of demons? What do the demons look like? And he told me that we'll never know, because they believed that if you drew or wrote about the demons, of course, all drawings and writings was considered magic, you were invoking them. So nobody in their right mind would draw or write about these demons.
That is actually that is a very I think not that uncommon. It's still that notion that if you say something out loud or you write something down, you are essentially in some way, shape, or form summoning or calling upon that thing. So that makes sense that they would not. It's sort of a he who shall not be named, right? So
it makes sense in their world, but it's one that the thought process has pretty much left our world, the mainstream. So we don't think about it that way when we hear it. It's like, oh, that's odd.
Yeah, I think outside of pagany circles, I suppose that is probably true. We have a question. Hi, Persephone. I see you out there. She says, how did you choose which interpretation of each legend to use?
Well, I researched them all, and I chose the one that I thought told the best story. In a lot of modern interpretations of Egyptian mythology, they have gotten rid of a lot of the older beliefs, and they just, okay, you die, you go on this boat, and you have to have the right prayers to get onto the boat of Ra, and you have to pass through and go through the Apep, and you have to have all the right prayers. And if you do that, you end up at the throne of the gods, where Anubis tests your heart. He cuts your heart out and weighs it on the scales against the feather of truth. But that doesn't really give you you don't have any, you don't get to meet Isis, you don't get to meet Thoth, you don't get to meet Horus. And so I will go with the interpretation that tells the better story, so that at the end, my readers have a deep understanding, not just of the mythology, but of each of the characters and the individuals in the mythology.
And so, are you planning to do more mythologies, like a Greek mythology, for example, or with different pantheons?
My next step is Japanese. Yes, there was a tremendous thundering, and the gods stepped over the mountains and walked to the edge of the sea. And he drove his great spear into the water and carved a great arc, and from it arose a great land. and she swept her broom across it and created a great pile that would be Mount Fuji. And this was the origin of the land of the rising sun.
That sounds amazing. It gave me goosebumps.
Well, you know, when you get into the stories, you have to ask yourself more than just what did they say? Why would anybody do this? You know, I mean, Loki was, in Norse mythology, Loki was predicted as the god of mischief who would cause the devastation of the gods of Asgard. Well, why would he do this? Well, in fact, if you read the mythologies, Loki's more of a trickster and a jokester at the beginning. And they accuse him of being the bad guy, and he gets worse and worse as it goes. And they treated him so badly that it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. He became what they made him. In Egyptian mythology, the evil god Set he had, you know, a brother and two sisters. His brother was Osiris, and his sisters were Isis and Nephesis. And these were the only people that were not married on the entire planet at the time, according to the mythology.
Didn't Isis gather up the parts of Osiris?
Yes, of Osiris, yes.
Yeah.
But
Put him back together.
Set killed Osiris first by drowning him in the mouth of the Nile.
Yes.
He locked him in the sarcophagus. But why did Set do this? Well, Isis was the older sister, and she saw Osiris and loved him. Everyone who saw Osiris loved him, and she married him. Well, she bore him several children, at least four. The god Set ended up having to marry his sister Nephesis, who was the goddess of death, and she never bore him a child.
And so he wanted kids, and he was mad. He was jelly.
Well, we can assume he wasn't pleased. And then, to make matters worse, after he was killed, he went to Nephesis, because of course he's dead. He goes to the goddess of death.
Right.
And the goddess of death met with him and bore his son Anubis.
Oh,
so
man.
These are the little things you have to look for. Well, wait a minute. No wonder Set was a bad guy. He was pissed off.
Oh, man. So I'm curious, which one of these is your favorite thing to write in?
Which mythology?
Well, I mean, like, yes.
Well, I had spent quite a while learning Egyptology when I was very young, you know, teenage years. But I kind of got out of it after then, and as a knight in the SCA, and I had always been interested in Norse mythology. I started with the comic books like most kids my age did. You know, I pretty much know Norse mythology forwards, backwards, and can tell you which author believes what. But I spent 4 years studying Egyptology right before I wrote this last book of the trilogy, just to get it right. Because you know, when you're dealing with a mythology, you can't be wrong, right? You have to be able to say, this is the source material, this is where I'm following from.
Well, I guess if you're going to write historical fiction, then yes.
Yes.
that is an important.
Well, you don't get to throw a spaceship into the Battle of Hastings and say, there it is.
Well, I mean, you know, that aliens guy, he throws that stuff in everywhere, right?
Well, I don't have a problem reading that, but that's not what I'm very meticulous on the way I think people would have really, you know, the problems people really would have had.
Right. It's not what you're trying to capture is aliens.
Yes. Well, for example, in the novel I'm going to be reading today, Souls of Steam,
yes,
I deeply researched the proper manners of British society, you know, because this is a very formal and very exact set of rules that they had to follow.
Well,
and
no,
the entire...
Yes, I was just going to say, tell us a little bit about this book, because this is what you're going to be reading to us from today. So give us a little bit about this book and your research and whatnot, so we have some context of what we're talking about here.
Okay, well, Souls of Steam, one young man who was in the military at the time, just was developing. He was injured, but he was a photographer before the war, so they made him a military photographer since he can't fight anymore.
Okay.
So he was developing photographs of the pictures he took in this cave because it was the only place dark enough. And he would see these smudges on the picture that would, rise up and then go off to the side. It kind of looked like smoke. And he finally realized that this only happened on photographs of people who were dying as he took the picture.
Oh, ooh, creepy.
So, of course, nobody in the military would talk to him. So he's on his way to talk to one of the premier scientists of London to try to get him interested in it so that hopefully he can find some way to make this invention come out and people believe him. And he actually hopes to cash in on it. But he was born and raised in the back streets of London,
right,
where he's now having to deal with learning a set of manners and being in a formal society he's completely unfamiliar with.
Now, how did you go about researching this? All of these manners and formalities?
Well, actually, in the first chapter, I do mention he goes and buys a book called The Formal Manners of British Society, written by Walter Orrin Bowman Jr. That happens to be the name of my grandfather.
The whole name? No way.
Yes, Walter Orrin Bowman Jr. And he was a true Southern gentleman. He lived in Atlanta, and he was, he taught me very early proper manners, which, I'm glad for the Civil War, and I'm glad, the slavery and all the bad things got thrown out. But, Southern manners and Southern hospitality also got thrown out at the time. And those were actually not the worst things America could do with some proper manners again. But at each chapter in Souls of Steam, and I doubt I'll be getting to chapter 2, each chapter starts out with a blurb from this book by Walter Orrin Bowman Jr. on different aspects, from how you do a formal tea, how you present yourself to a royalty, how you duel, how a woman should wear makeup, how men should address a woman whom they have never met before, and how you should act when you're in the presence of royalty. All these things were very, very specifically written, and you have to understand that at the time, breaking those rules would be tantamount to excluding yourself from these societies forever.
They were, well, it was an interesting time, I suppose, because I know that many of these rules existed in part as well so that they had socially acceptable ways to communicate intimacies with one another, right?
Yes,
so if they had
true.
on somebody or something to that effect, and you couldn't be, risque. So
No.
how do you express, interest in somebody if you can't even talk to them, right? So all kinds of little rules around how to approach,
in fact, it does say that the first mention of a proposal should be made to her father, not to her. That's one of the rules.
Can't even talk to her about it. Go straight to the dad.
I know. It would be unacceptable.
And I'm not sure that's so great in today's it would be so well received in today's society. But
actually, in Charles Dickens' novel, David Copperfield, David approaches a young lady and they make plans and end up having a secret engagement. And when her father finds out about it, he is livid. So, this is the way things were.
Yeah, most definitely. So today it's Souls of Steam that you're going to be reading to us from. And for everybody watching at home, before I turn the screen over to you to read, for everybody watching at home, you guys, if you have questions, comments, whatnot, while Jerry is reading, please feel free to put them into the comment section of wherever it is that you're watching from. And hopefully YouTube, those are the ones that I get best. I'm able to see them. So, Facebook can be sort of sketchy, but put your comments or questions in, and when Jay is done, we will take those questions one by one, and Jay can answer them for you. So are you ready to read, good sir?
I guess I am.
All right, then I will put myself on mute. I will also be in the comments section with our viewers listening as you read. So here we go.
All right. Okay. This is Souls of Steam. It is available in our paperback. And if you look closely, these are the photographs, one of the photographs that's mentioned in the first chapter that these people have to go and search for. They've searched for where the souls are going. So Souls of Steam by J. Palmer, Chapter 1. Behind a cluttered desk in a cramped but otherwise spotless office, a thin young man in a dapper suit sat staring at a blueprint as if his life depended on it. His fixation displayed no awareness that I'd entered. I stood politely for a full minute, yet he seemed determined to ignore me. Professor Evermost? I asked. Speak quickly, Professor Evermost snapped. His eyes never rose off his blueprint. My time is valuable. My name's Corporal Thomas James. Professor Evermost seized a ruler, aligned it carefully, and connected 2 points upon his blueprint with a very short pencil. Professor, I've waited 6 weeks for this appointment and would appreciate your full attention for at least 6 minutes. Sir, if you were dying, what would you pay for 6 more minutes of life? Professor Evermost asked. When you ask for my time, you request my most precious commodity. Therefore, before you attempt to beg or money or sell me something, I ask you, what concern of yours is worth 6 minutes of my life? I deepened my voice. My concern is about your death. Eyes so dark blue they seemed almost purple rose from the blueprint to glare at me. His deepening frown and narrowed brows exuded displeasure. Sir, are you threatening me? In response, I handed him 8 photographs I'd taken in South Africa right before the end of the war, and another 10 from southern Germany almost a year later. Each photo portrayed one badly wounded soldier or sick person, and each had a smudged or blurry spot rising from their chest and running to the white edge of the photo. Professor Evermost quickly flipped through them. Identical distortions, Professor Evermost acknowledged. Water on the lens or a smudge? No, I said. Bad photographic paper? I'm a professional photographer. These are 18 of hundreds of photos I took. These few are the only ones that showed that mysterious defect. I see nothing here to interest me. The only difference between these photos and all the others is that these men were photographed as they died. Eyebrows rose, and the dark blue eyes flashed at me. Sir, if this is some improper jest, he warned. The first of these photos I developed in a cave beside my army camp. I didn't know it at the time, but the cave's walls were rich with phosphorus and had been used as a hideout by our retreating enemy. After a fierce firefight, the British forces smoked them out of the cavern with a deadly combination of chlorine, bleach, and ammonia. Well, that's chlorine gas. Precisely. I brought back samples of the chemicals on those cavern walls. In southern Germany, I spent weeks experimenting with mixtures until I duplicated the effect of developing photographs in that cave. Professor Evermost's frown deepened again, his thin nose wrinkling as if assaulted by the vilest stench. Sir, what you're asking me to believe is utter nonsense, Professor Evermost said. I've dedicated my life to the investigation of science and the firm conviction that all reality is substantial and quantifiable. This is impossible. He looked like he wanted to hurl my photographs back at me, yet his fingers clung to them. Professor, those exact thoughts have disturbed my sleep for over a year, I replied. My military superiors scoffed at it. Newspapers refused to print it. A bishop threatened to excommunicate me. With visible effort, Professor Evermost stood up to face me. His gaze had a startlingly riveting fixation. His face looked youthful, in his late 20s, yet he had a deep, somber eye under prominent brows, although his black eyebrows seemed thin and unusually long. Slowly, as if reluctantly, he thrust out his palm. Forgive my impropriety, Corporal Thomas James, he said, and we shook hands. I am Professor Thaddeus Alexander Albert Evermost, and I'm honored to make your acquaintance. Please describe to me the locations where these photographs were taken. The photos of the soldiers were taken in South Africa, and the civilians were photographed in southern Germany. Ah, yes, the cholera outbreak, Professor Evermost said. Where better to photograph people dying, I asked. Yes, but I meant, what are the coordinates of these photos? Professor Evermost asked. North, south, east? These poor soldiers, for example, all have the same background. Yes, those photos were taken in the critical care ward. It was originally an abandoned warehouse, I believe. I'm not sure which compass points the walls faced. We may have to go there, Professor Evermost said. Professor Evermost rolled up his blueprint, placed it aside, then sorted my photographs upon his desk in 4 rows, setting the forest and trench shots in separate stacks. See the matching backgrounds? Professor Evermost asked, pointing with one finger. Here's one wall of the military hospital, and here's the wall opposite it. So I assume from these angles of sunlight, these photos in the civilian ward are the same. What does that tell you? I stared at the photos I knew so well. Suddenly, something that had always been there became obvious. The mists all go in one direction, I exclaimed. Opposite directions, Professor Evermost corrected. Against these 2 walls, the mists go to the patient's left. On the opposite sides, the mists go to the patient's right. In both rooms, these lines travel in the same direction. What does it mean? I asked. I'm sorry, Corporal Thomas James, but I'm too fixed in my philosophy to name what you appear to have photographed. Then I'll say it, I said. This photographic solution is capable of capturing the images of the human soul arising from its dying body. Our eyes met, expressions firmly resolved. Corporal, the implications of this are staggering, Professor Evermost said. I don't believe in souls, but as a man of science, I can't refuse an opportunity to investigate. That's where I'm stumped, Professor, I said. I can prove my process works, but I can't prove these misty smudges are souls. That's not my purpose, Corporal, Professor Evermost said. As souls are supernatural, I assume these aren't souls, which requires me to discover what they are. If these are souls rising from their bodies, why wouldn't they continue to rise straight up, which would direct these smudges that way? All these smudges rise from their chests like smoke, then travel sideways. As all appear to go in the same direction, the only logical conclusion is that wherever they're going, these smudges are going to the same destination. But where would a soul go after its body has died? I asked. That, Corporal, is what we must investigate. For 3 days, Professor Evermost and I haunted the city hospital, him assisting with no less skill than any of its doctors. As always, I carried a compass and 2 of his cameras, each with a flash primed to shoot, since he didn't trust my camera. I found this insulting, but said nothing. While I was poor and unknown, every newspaper in London just delighted in printing his name. If my discovery was going to see daylight, I needed someone like him. If he accepted my discovery and announced it, then everyone would listen to me. Yet I waited nervously. Since developing the first smudge photo in South Africa, while I was still healing from my combat wounds, I'd feared I was going mad. No one would look at it. No one took my claim seriously. Professor Evermost was my last hope of financial reward. Unfortunately, new nightmares assailed my sleep. In South Africa, I'd been horrified by my discovery. In southern Germany, I dreamed of selling my formula for unequaled riches. Now, I'd never considered attempting to follow the mists to see where they led, and wasn't sure I wanted to. Could decent men survive learning such secrets? My attempts at conversation were politely spurned, and the few times he wasn't occupied with patients, Professor Evermost pulled out his leather-bound journal and wrote in it. On the 3rd night, an elderly woman who'd collapsed in the street was brought in, barely able to breathe. And when we developed our photos of her demise, using my chemicals, her smudge was clearly visible. With an exasperated sigh, Professor Evermost accepted that my solution worked exactly as I'd claimed. Southeast, I'd say, Professor Evermost said. Wherever this unexplained effect leads, if we would follow it, we must travel southeast. How? I asked, trying to subdue my unrepentant smile. West is our first destination, Professor Evermost said. We must visit my generous benefactress and see if this investigation interests her. Her? Mrs. Marcia Jane Courtney was a tall, wasp-shaped woman approaching advanced years. Her slim, hourglass figure might have been the ribbing of her tight corset. Her hair was white with age, but full and attractively styled. Her modest and immaculate day dress was olive green corded silk patterned in cut velvet and matching satin, with a fitted blouse, bustled skirt, and a small train. Her gown looked more expensive than my parents' house. She walked slowly, almost a glide, into her extravagant parlor, with a poise that startled me in its mesmeric perfection. Every movement flowed like gentle water. She blinked more than nodded at the professor, yet her light blue eyes swept across me with a direct steadiness, as if she were my old commanding officer, surveying me as an unthinking tool suited only for her purposes. Her mansion was the most ostentatious palace I'd ever seen. On the way to her parlor, we'd pass through magnificent galleries with immense stairways sided by polished banisters, antique furnishings and portraits, all under high ceilings painted with mural pastels, as imposing as the Royal Museum. Her grandiose parlor was breathtaking. I stared disbelieving, wondering if my discovery could ever afford such wondrous splendor. The wealth of this woman could feed every homeless child in England. Mrs. Courtney, Professor Evermost effused as he bowed deeply. Professor Evermost seemed a different man in her presence. He'd always been tall, slight, and energetic, but stiffly controlled, as if his own will were chains he locked about himself. He was at the peak of his prime, with no trace of the heaviness or weariness that consumes older men. His head was draped with oiled black hair, and his complexion glowed of good skin, but he was of an age equal to any son of hers, if progeny she had. He bowed before her formally, yet with a looseness I'd never seen, as if relaxed only in her company. Her gaze affixed upon him with a smile greater than intellectual interest. His manners were perfectly proper and totally unknown to me. Professor Evermost displayed the etiquettes, airs, and dignity of a perfect English gentleman. He waited patiently to ensure she was done speaking before he replied, always with exemplary courtesy and deference to her station. If he'd addressed her as Your Excellency, I wouldn't have been surprised. She bore herself as regally as a queen. By contrast, I was a child. At 22, I'd lived nowhere but in my parents' ratty house, a South African battlefield, and a tiny splintery apartment in Germany. My pockets were empty, and my limited education offered small hope of financial security. My plain tweed coat and faded trousers looked out of place in her mansion. I stood a few inches taller than Professor Evermost, yet I was far more muscular, clearly a laborer, capped with blonde hair and a fair complexion like most Scandinavians. I said nothing for fear of speaking wrong. My penniless, larcenous upbringing hadn't prepared me for the environs of wealth and breeding. Introductions were pleasantly brief, with manners as stiff and formal as a military court. Slowly she offered her hand, tracing it through the air as if dancing or deep under water, and I kissed it, at which her eyes widened. That seemed to conclude the entirety of my participation. She performed a meticulous study of my photographs in silence, then contradicted the professor over his skepticism that the photographic distortions could be anything but human souls. Do you think the trace sulfates reacted to the nitrates? Mrs. Courtney asked. I did, but the differing acidic levels of oxidation would imply the catalyst was sulfurous acid, not sulfuric acid, Professor Evermost said. Upon observation, I believe this is red, not white phosphorus. Thomas's chemist must have been mistaken. We should re-examine the components. I ordered all the chemicals we'll need, Professor Evermost said. Introducing silver sulfates could help measure the exposure of the divine light, Miss Courtney said. Your analysis assumes the possibility of souls, Professor Evermost said, shaking his head. Your pioneer work in spiritual mathematics is entirely theoretical. These Photographs prove spiritual mathematics is more than a theory. I slunk down upon the thick pillows of a wing chair, embarrassed by my lack of education, completely left out of their conversation. Dr. Glackenheimer will be returning to England in 3 months, on the 22nd of December, Mrs. Courtney finally announced. Our expedition begins the next day. Professor Evermost bowed again and thanked her profusely, using words like knitted and paladin, which I later looked up in the dictionary to understand. Although never giving me a second glance, Mrs. Courtney thanked both of us for coming and slowly glided from her parlor, leaving servants to fetch our hats and coats and show us out. Corporal Thomas James, never do that again, Professor Evermost chastised me as soon as we were out on the streets. Your behavior was abominable. I barely said a word. Corporal, when a lady offers her hand, you do not kiss it. You kissed her hand. How dare you? I most certainly did not. Sir, a true lady is always assumed to be wearing spotless white gloves, even when her hand is bare. A lady's gloves are her honor. To besmirch them in even the slightest way is unthinkable. To hold her hand toward your lips and kiss at it is the highest compliment a gentleman may make to a lady above his station, unless she is his fiancée. To actually touch her hand with your lips is an inexcusable offense. Oh, I didn't know. Please, how can I apologize? Say nothing. The event never occurred. You have 3 months to make a gentleman of yourself, or your presence in her company will not endure an hour. I shall expect you, refined and reserved, with your sparse luggage in my office at 6 a.m. on December the 23rd. Without another word, Professor Evermost abandoned me on the street, striding briskly away. Too ashamed to follow, I stood feeling like an untamed baboon. How could a former street urchin learn to be a gentleman in only 3 months? Looking like an impeccable popinjay at exactly 6 a.m. on December the 23rd, I re-entered the tiny office of Professor Evermost and presented myself. 2 burly laborers stood just outside his door, each with one hand cart, one of which held a large trunk as might be taken on an ocean liner, and both looked askance at my pretentious attire. A second door opened onto a large but very cramped and humid laboratory, from which loud bubblings, hisses, and crackles emerged. The laboratory was filled with intricate, complex iron machines spewing steam, most with copper or brass moving parts, and Professor Evermost seemed to be turning them off. Despite the cold of December, I was wearing a new suit almost identical to the one Professor Evermost had worn in the hospital. I carried a small but heavy suitcase, tightly packed as possible. My father had thought my suit a wasteful extravagance when I explained why I needed the money, yet my mother was thrilled. Likewise, only she was delighted by my purchase of The Proper Manners of Formal Society by Walter Orrin Bowman, Jr. I hated the book, yet I'd studiously memorized every line. The meticulousness of British proper manners reminded me of my best friend, Basil Bevan Bonar Balfour. Basil was unusually short with sandy hair like coarse gruel, a taste I could never stomach, but which he thought made a delightful meal. As a young boy, Basil had a round face, which he never outgrew. He was skinny as a walking stick, probably because he was an orphan and ate infrequently, usually whatever he could steal. He wore fancy clothes which he stole off unwatched clotheslines in the Hardgrove district. Mothers quickly learned to bring their wash in before dusk when Basil was around. Basil had the basest manners and morals I'd ever known. More than once I'd spied him kneeling among a pack of dogs and drinking from the same puddle. Our childhood antics were of the most agreeable unsavoriness. After walking through a crowd, he'd suddenly display a pocket watch or several ladies' handkerchiefs. More than once he and I had to flee from outraged victims. Not that I often stole, but Basil was such a good friend that his company made up for any dangers. Basil would share whatever he had, even if he hadn't eaten that day. He'd hand me half a loaf of hot bread swiped from a windowsill before he ate a bite. In winter, he helped the other kids pinch blankets from clotheslines and insisted the younger orphans bundled down with him to keep warm. Also, He liked to play in the sewers and look up at the ladies walking over the grates. He'd whistle when he spied their undergarments. To this day, I can't hear the word scamp without thinking of Basil. Forcing my memories of Basil away for fear that Professor Evermost might suspect my humble beginnings, I stepped into his laboratory and announced my presence with a polite cough. I'd learned to do that from my book. Ah, Corporal Thomas James, Professor Evermost said. Excellent punctuality. Allow me a moment. Don't want any gaskets blowing while we're away. Brass knobs, twisted by Professor Evermost, snuffed tiny flames under intricate machines lit by gas. Caps were set atop oil lamps and water was poured into stoves, causing loud hisses. Several bursts of steam arose. I had no idea what any of these fantastic inventions did, but the machine beside me was spewing mist from 3 different nozzles. One was obviously hot, wafting straight up, another translucent to the point of invisibility, and the other icy white like breath on a frozen morning. Professor Evermost extinguished this machine last. Then he hurried me into his office and locked his laboratory door. Finally, his eyes fell upon my suitcase. Are you certain you packed the essentials? Professor Evermost asked. Nothing but, I assured him. With a gesture, he had me hand my bag to one of the burly men, who chuckled and put it on his stout dolly. The man with the heavy traveling trunk didn't seem amused. We followed as we descended to the chilly morning street where a strange carriage was waiting. I think I'll stop there because otherwise we're going to be running too late.
Oh, okay. That was a pretty good start there. So that was kind of fun. We have one of our regular viewers out here made a comment. I'm looking for it, Philip. That oh, Philip, where's your comment? I saw because I was chatting a little. I can't find it. There it is. Nice bit of trivia. that was what he said in regards to the whole hand kissing thing, which I was actually familiar with that particular custom, mostly because of Ren Fair, right? So where that is also
been to every Ren Fair, so I understand.
Yep. So that's definitely a thing. We do have a couple of questions out here if you would like to take some questions from the audience.
Sure.
Okay. Give me just 1 second to scroll back and find them. Let's see. Here we go. Are your books often placed in the real world, or do you build your own world?
I've got some of each. Actually, I've got them all. My first book, Death Quest, the Vikings trilogy, first book, starts out in the real world in England, but obviously they have to find a gateway, a portal that humans can travel through to get them to Norse mythology. Then they're walking through the realms of Norse gods. I have several historical fictions. Those are obviously specifically on Earth. I do have some books like The Seneschal, which is it's in a fantasy world, but there's no fantasy elements in it. There's no magic or dragons or anything like that. It's about a medieval war seen from the point of view of the supply clerk, the guy who's trying to make sure that there's enough food and water and horses and weapons and hay for the horse, all the little details of managing a war from behind the scenes. He's the one that got put in charge of it.
So I have a question. In your chapter that you just read, there were 2 words that you said the professor used, which the main character didn't know what those words were and looked them up later. What are those words and what are their definitions? Will you tell us?
No. I don't remember what they were off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look at them. One of them was paladin. Yes. You know what a paladin is.
I know what a paladin is. The other word I didn't recognize.
The other word was knitted. I believe it's elevated, lofty.
Gotcha. So you do remember them.
I'm running it back through you asked me on the spot. I have 14 books and a coloring book that I did here, coloring storybook. I can't remember all of them instantaneously. It takes a second.
And so also another question from Jack is, has your research into your legends ever become an obsession that overtakes your life and flows into your SCA persona?
Actually, my SCA persona is a Viking dentist. I also do information extraction because they're pretty much the same thing. And my personal persona died at the Battle of Hastings. So I never made it into the later, Middle Ages. So I was a Dark Ages person. So, and as I know Norse mythology and have known it pretty much, since I was a teenager, that's just kind of where I fit into it. But it does help that, my device is Odin's horse Sleipnir, child of Loki. I can't divide myself from my books most of the time because there's so much of me in them. I mean,
I'm just cracking up at the whole information extraction through the fine art of tooth torture, also known as
Yeah, I actually had a pouch that I carried around for a few years of some tools I picked up at a garage sale that must have been left outside for like 3 years because they're rusty and old and covered in just muck. And I'm like, yeah, these are my dentist tools. And of course, nobody ever volunteered to let me work on
I'm not sure that I get this comment, but Marnie says Valtor as Dark Ages only. Does that mean something to you?
Yes, my SCA name is Sir Valtor of Oslo.
Well, there you go. Dark Ages only, Sir Valtor. Let's see. How about, do you ever suffer the infamous writer's block? And if so, how do you get past it?
Well, I don't suffer writer's block. In fact, I'm the opposite. I have like a 30-page text file that I keep. Just if I think of something, a character, hey, this would be a great character, I write it down into it. If I think of, hey, this would be a unique kind of magic system, or this would be a nice world, I write it in there. And someday I may combine those three and make a story. Right. But I've got too many story ideas to handle them all right now. However, I have had I've had points where I reached I don't know where to go with this story, and I don't know what to do with this character. And when I do that, I ask myself, what is it that makes me passionate, right?
Mm.
And I mean, it could be anything from abortion to civil rights, or how a warrior should be honorable. Should he be honorable even if he knows it will cost him the battle? You sit down and write a little essay about something that you're passionate about, and then that essay becomes the point of view of your character. At that point, I know exactly where to go.
You have solved your own problem.
In fact, in one story, I started out, the first thing I wrote was an argument between two of the main characters. I mean, characters that get along are actually kind of boring. Characters that argue all the time. My friends and I can't be in the same room until we're shouting at each other over some trivia of, Lord of the Rings or quoting Princess Bride.
It's yes. He didn't have a peanut. He had a cashew. No. Okay. So we are nearing the end of the show. We do have a couple more questions, but before I ask the questions, I want to first say, so our giveaway today is a copy of the book that you just read from, which is Souls of Steam. And for those of you watching at home, now is the time to put your name into the comments. If you would like to be entered into the drawing to win, I'm going to spin the wheel live here on the show after we take our last couple questions. So put your name into the comments, and then I will add you onto the wheel. The other way that you can get into every single drawing that we do here on Author Reads and on our Wednesday segment, Fey News, is to join the channel and or the Patreon. You can have a maximum of 3 entries per person. So I will let you guys go ahead and get your names tonight. Yes, okay, I see you, Carol and Gunther. And I have a question here. If you could pick one set of mythology to live in as the fact that rules the world, which one would it be?
Unquestionably Egyptian. Not even a
Oh,
moment's doubt.
why is that? With all of your knowledge of Norse mythology, you choose
Well,
Egyptian.
I do like Norse mythology, but Norse mythology worships the warrior because at the end at the end of time, Ragnarok will start, and Odin needs the warriors to be with him to fight in battle in order to win Ragnarok. This is why the warriors are worshipped in there. They're given the elevated status. Only they get to go to Valhalla. The In Egyptian mythology, when you go before Anubis to have your heart tested against the feather of truth, you have to recite a prayer which is very, very meaningful to me. And it's about, I am the Binu bird, which is to them that's what they call the phoenix. And it says, I am good. I do not wish ill upon others. I give food to the needy. I give clothes to the naked. I ferry those who need it across the river. I take care of the poor. I take care of the people. I care about the people. My heart is pure. And it is for this reason that I deserve to live in the lands of the gods. And it is that the idea that it doesn't matter how rich you are or how great a warrior you are or anything, it matters how much you care about other people. And I think that is one hell of a faith.
That I didn't know that. That is very cool. I'm learning so many cool things from you today about mythology. So thank you for sharing your knowledge. I have one question that I would like to ask based on what you were reading earlier, if I may, and then I'll do the drawing.
Sure.
But you mentioned it spiritual math.
Spiritual mathematics.
Yes, is that a real thing? And if so, what is that?
It gets into it in the later chapters of the book. Essentially, Mrs. Courtney devised. She's very intelligent. I like very intelligent women. So she devised a system of mathematics to justify the balance of faith and the real world. And this is her system of kind of like magic, but there's no magic in the book. It's just this is her belief in this is the solid facts of faith that can be proven mathematically.
Kind of metaphysics, if you will, or a precursor
Yes.
to metaphysics.
Yes. It obviously doesn't get too deeply into it. I don't show you how to do the math.
Well, right.
But this is a I do have friends who are mathematical geniuses, no joke. I've seen them do 10-digit trigonometry in their heads. They scare me.
Everybody has their talent. That is
and you don't want to listen to them argue with each other for 2 hours over whether 2 is a prime number. They don't care. But
I do. You never know.
Well, technically it's not, but then there's other rules of math which I never even learned in school, but they learned in the advanced, mathematics courses at the UW. So I can't argue with them.
Analytical math or something. Who knows?
Yes.
All right, so it is now that time where we come upon our drawing. So let me pull up the wheel here. Here we go. So you guys can all see, here's our list of names. I think I've got everybody from the comments and then also all of our Patreon and YouTube subscribers. So let me just check one more time if I missed any names out there. Okay, guys, here we go. I'm going to submit and then we're going to spin that wheel. So, David Strom, congratulations. You are the winner of today's book. And David was an author on our show fairly recently, actually. So that is pretty cool. Your book will be going to a fellow author.
Excellent. Send me his address. I'll put it in the mail as soon as possible.
Of course. So before we let you go this afternoon, is there anything that you would like to say to everybody?
Well, I just like to thank everybody who's a reader. That is probably the thing that this world needs the most right now, is people that learn to think for themselves. And I don't think there's anything that promotes thinking as much as reading.
I would tend to agree with that, but I'm a bibliophile. So your information, of course, in the ticker. It is also on the low bar. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this afternoon. Please check out Jay's work. And if nothing else, give a like, subscribe, follow to him on his various social media. If you do happen to purchase one of his books, please leave a review. Reviews always help authors. Extra more than they help indie authors, extra more than they help big name authors. So please remember to do that. And we're on Friday, so that means our next show will be Sunday, 4 p.m. Pacific for Handmade Home Shopping. Yes.
Point of fact, if you try to reach me right now on Facebook, during the last administration, I might have said a few things that some people didn't like. So right now I'm under the name Jay Dancer.
Jay Dancer. Your Instagram and your Twitter are all
my Twitter is fine and Instagram is fine, but on Facebook, I have a new page for temporary until they unfreeze my other page.
Okay.
Yes. And my girlfriend and I are ballroom dancers, which is why I took Jay Dancer.
That sounds fun. Ballroom dancing is great. So that's a cool.
We'll be doing it tomorrow night.
Well, enjoy your ballroom dancing then. So, and with that said, that is everything. Please remember to hit the like and subscribe, you guys, and we will see you hopefully on Sunday for Handmade Home Shopping. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello, friends. This is Gone for Hammerhands. Thank you for checking out Fairy Princess Lolly's channel. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button. And if you'd like to support these magical creations, fly over to our Patreon and join the fairy family. Safe travels!